a set of committee rules, and one of the unwritten rules is that when your phone goes off or makes an audible sound, you have to bring treats for the committee. There are 2 dozen Paradise Donuts there in the center. Those are for you all for my transgression 2 meetings ago when my phone rang. So leading by example today and bringing you all donuts. And I will tell you, those are really good donuts. So don't leave those boxes there. Make sure that you get some of your compensatory treats today. Today we're going to approve some minutes, February 15th, 17th, March 1st, 3rd, 8th, and 10th. Is there a motion to approve these minutes? Motion by Representative Gartner. I'll treat it as a second by Representative Bergquist. Is there any discussion on the minutes? Seeing none, all in favor say aye. Aye. Opposed, nay. The ayes appear to have it. The ayes do have it. Minutes are approved. We will have first up a presentation by Sherry Feist Albrecht on her role with the Southwest Power Pool. And when that is concluded, we will take up and work bills today. So we'll welcome Ms. Feist Albrecht to the committee.
Good morning. I would like to give my greetings to you. Thank you, Chair Finch, Vice Chair Schreiber, Ranking Minority Member Keither, for the invitation to come and present to you regarding the role of the Regional State Committee at the Southwest Power Pool. As I begin my discussion today, I'm going to cover a little bit of the SPP structure just to make sure you're familiar with a little bit of that background, the authority that has been granted to the Regional State Committee, as well as its structure. And then we'll take a look at some of the activities the Regional State Committee is engaged in, and then some of the internal functions that we have in place at the KCC to monitor SPP activities, as well as current issues that are pending before SPP that may be of particular interest to you. The SPP is a regional transmission organization that was recognized by FERC and began its operations as such in 2004. As a regional transmission organization, it operates under an open access transmission tariff, which are basically the rules and regulations governing its operations, putting everybody on notice what those different requirements are. The SPP operates as a nonprofit corporation. It has a board of directors, and they meet on a quarterly basis to conduct business. So part of they always meet in conjunction with a members committee, which is a combination of 22 members. SPP has about 106 members, current members of investor-owned utilities, electric cooperatives, municipalities, independent transmission companies, power marketers, retail customers such as Walmart and Google, alternative powers, public power like wind coalition entities, federal power marketing agency. So that diverse membership is represented on that members committee. There are 22 members selected to serve that. They act in an advisory capacity to the SPP board of directors. So whenever the SPP is getting ready to take a vote on a policy matter coming before it, the members committee first takes a vote, signals kind of what their interests are to the board of directors. The board of directors vote, but they vote, it's a silent vote. You don't know who's voting what. It's not disclosed other than whether something passes or not. And you see on the slide there, number 3, the board of directors members committee, and the board has those typical corporate board committees of corporate governance, of finance, human resource. You'll also see a couple of different committees there, or task forces. And from time to time, the SPP board of directors takes up issues of particular interest. They might be broad scale changes to the tariff that they want to take a look at, changing internal processes, One of those you'll see is the Strategic, Creative, and Reengineering Integrated Planning Team, SCRIPT, that did a lot of work and released a comprehensive study recommending some changes in the tariff, one of which is consolidating some of the planning processes that exist at SPP. So the Consolidated Planning Process Task Force is essentially an offshoot of that, but they both are under and report directly to the board for their activities and their ongoing activities there that are out of the ordinary, sort of similar to what you've probably seen or heard referred to as the HIT process, the Holistic Integrated Tariff Team from a couple of years ago. So they've kind of been building from one team to the next and looking at kind of an overhaul of the tariff to modernize. As they modernize the grid, take a look at what changes need to be made in the tariff. One of those working groups, one of those committees that operates under the board and directors and members committee is what's referred to as MOPSI, the Markets and Operations Policy Committee. There are a number of working groups that operate under the direction of the Markets and Operations Policy Committee. You'll see those listed on slide 4. Things like economic studies, looking at electric storage resources, market design changes, operating reliability, supply adequacy, project costs, transmission. So those are all technical working groups that work under and report up through the Markets and Operation Policy Committee, who then makes recommendations for tariff changes to advance to the Board of Directors and the Members Committee. The Regional State Committee is an organizational group within that SPP organizational structure. When FERC authorized SPP as a regional transmission organization, that included authorization of the Regional State Committee as part of its governing tariff provisions. So that authority derives directly from that FERC order, from those SPP bylaws that were authorized by FERC. SPP, the RSC developed they started their work in 2004. Just as the RTO came into being, so did the RSC, so did several other working groups. And I'm going to kind of basically whip through slides 6, 7, and 8 very quickly, just to say that basically the representation on the Regional State Committee we're composed of commissioners, one commissioner from each state that has regulatory jurisdiction over either rates or services that members of SPP provide in those states. That doesn't diminish any of the state's regulatory jurisdiction. We retain that independence and have all the jurisdiction that we have under our state law. And then 7.2, which appears at pages 8 and 9 of the PowerPoint slides, gives you we are an advisory group. We have independence on certain issues based on the language in the SPP bylaws and approved by the tariff, but we have the ability to participate pretty much in any working group, Board of Directors meeting, task force, committee that SPP has in place. But we do have some primary areas of responsibility, and I have to admit to an oversight on my part with regard to slide 9. We have our primary responsibility is cost allocation, trying to figure out how to divvy up the costs of transmission upgrades and build out enhancements to the system. So what you see there is listed as A and B are both types of cost allocation mechanisms. That's our primary function. That's where we've exercised most of the authority over the years in developing cost allocation methodologies. Then from more of a market perspective, we also have the authority to allocate financial transmission rights. So as people are making offers into the day ahead market, they can hedge against potential congestion and have an offset for any undue costs. So we have the ability to regulate that, or to address those types of issues as well. One of the other important authorities that we have that I failed to put on this slide, just a complete oversight on my part, was planning for remote resources. That, I believe, originated with the early RSC having concerns about, well, we're going to be bringing wind onto the system. What does that look like? Are we going to have any say in how you plan for building out that transmission system? So planning for remote resources is one of our authorities. And the other one that has become of utmost importance, particularly in the last year, is resource adequacy. That traditionally has been a role for state governments. We regulate the utilities in our state. We look at their capital expenditures. We look at the rate design and approve those functions, determine whether there's sufficient capacity to meet the load requirements in our own state. And so those translate over into our role on the RSC for SPP. And of course, as you'll see in later slides, I'll go into that, how important that has become in the last year. The Regional State Committee, as it's structured currently, is composed of 11 members. We have Arkansas, Iowa, Kansas, Louisiana, Missouri, Nebraska, New Mexico, North Dakota, Oklahoma, South Dakota, and Texas. Oklahoma and Kansas are fully within the footprint of SPP. Portions of Texas, Missouri, Iowa, Arkansas, New Mexico, North Dakota, South Dakota, and Texas are within the footprint of SPP. It's my understanding that Minnesota, who has a small portion of their operations within the SPP footprint, will probably soon be joining the Regional State Committee as a member. We have quarterly business meetings that run in conjunction with the SPP Board of Directors meetings. Those meetings are usually the last Monday of January, April, July, and October. And we also have a joint meeting with the board and the members committee for our afternoon, for part of the afternoon. And that's just an efficiency that the SPP board created a couple of years ago. There are several reports that various SPP staff members are making to the board that they also need to be making to the RSC, and we just combined for the purposes of receiving those reports. Then the board usually meets the following day. We do have monthly educational sessions. Generally, that's kind of at the discretion of the RSC president. Some years we've had them fairly regularly, others not so much. But within the RSC, there are three groups that exist. The cost allocation working group has existed as long as the RSC has. It was created as a function of the RSC bylaws. I happen to serve as the Kansas representative on the cost allocation working group. It's composed of staff members from the various state agencies there to support the work of their RSC commissioners. They have a variety of experiences. There are accountants and engineers and economists and lawyers and policy, public policy kinds of expertise among the group. One of the other groups that's of more recent origin, in 2018, we established a joint group with the organization of MISO states, the equivalent of the RSC for the Mid-Continent Independent System Operator, which is the region that operates directly to our east and with whom we share a seam. Part of I'll get into those details later. I won't get ahead of myself. And then the other one is very recent development is the Improved Resource Availability Task Force. An RSC commissioner chairs that task force, and it was formed to address the top 4 issues that came out of the winter weather event and the comprehensive report from last year. So we have 2 fuel assurance issues and 2 resource planning and availability issues that we are diving into in a deep way. The cost allocation working group, I've really kind of gone into the details there. We are assigned specific working groups that we kind of follow and report back to the whole cost allocation working group on. For example, I follow the operating reliability working group. I also am a second to the supply adequacy working group. And so I follow most of those other working groups meet once a month. They're composed of sometimes 20, 25 members. They are chaired by usually a utility person, and the leadership is, they have it divided up and they try to do a diverse representation on those working groups, but they really dive into the details of what the tariff currently requires, where there are shortcomings. They offer up policy recommendations or practical recommendations really for policy changes that then filter up through the Markets and Operations Policy Committee and ultimately to the board. But that's where a lot of the very technical work gets done. A lot of the reports are done. Studies that SPP staff is performing get reported back through those working groups and go filter back up to the board of directors. The SPP RSC, I'm on slide 15 now. I apologize. I'm not very good about advancing things here. So sorry. There are 4 RSC members and 4 OMS members on this SEAMS Liaison Committee. It was created in 2018 out of concern for the barriers that we saw that existed for advancing transmission projects across the MISO and SPP SEAMS. Part of the problem that exists is you have MISO as a separate entity from SPP. They each have their own planning processes. They have their own market designs. They have their own cost-benefit analyses, and they don't necessarily mesh up. And so those have created barriers for the transmission across that seam. In an effort to, I guess, light a fire might be as good a way to put it as any. The states got together and decided that we really wanted to raise this issue up as one that was concerning to us. We had seen some reliability issues with winter storms over the years, and they might have been primarily in MISO, but they had an impact on an SPP. And then certainly with last year's winter storm, that relationship is a very important one. And so that was the whole genesis of that working group, that committee, is just to try to bring light to some of the issues that we see. We engage stakeholders and we do surveys, and we're working on different issues like rate pancaking, the piling on of charges as you try to operate across the system. So that's the primary function of that particular committee. And then the Improved Resource Availability Task Force, that was the one that was created to really take the deep dive into the winter weather event. It springs out of the comprehensive report that SPP developed. It identifies the top 4 issues: 2 fuel assurance, 2 resource planning and availability. The membership on that particular committee is composed of, I believe, 3 supply adequacy working group members, 5 cost allocation working group members, 2, I believe, operating reliability work group members, 1 market working group member. It's, as I said earlier, chaired by an RSC commissioner, and I happen to serve on that particular task force as one of the COG members. The fuel, I would like to direct your attention to slide 17. The fuel assurance issues that we're working on are to develop some policies to enhance the fuel assurance to improve the availability and reliability of generation in the SPP region. Some of the things that we're looking at there are SPP is planned as a summer peaking regional transmission organization. I mean, all of its operations are kind of developed around that to meet the load and the needs that are available for at summer peak. A lot of the studies that have been developed tend to follow that summer peaking type approach. There is definitely a need to develop maybe some seasonal approaches and expanding loss of load expectation studies to cover those sorts of events. So we're exploring some of those. We are working with SPP staff. They're the ones who conduct the studies. And so the expertise of these other working groups that are working on a lot of these issues already has intensified, and that filters back through. And we're directing some of the work of the SPP staff and along these lines. For fuel assessment, one of the big things that we're looking at there is what can we do to emphasize the importance of gas and electric coordination. How do we do that? There's a force majeure clause that appears as a standard clause in most gas contracts. It's a standard clause that was developed by the North American Energy Standards Board. And so I think there's ongoing litigation regarding that clause, but are there things that we could be doing? Are there issues that we could look into there to improve the coordination? So developing some of those relationships with other entities has been very helpful. And I would also say that of the 106 members that exist of SPP, we do have the two most recent members are gas entities. One is Southern Star Pipeline, and the other one is Continental Gas, which is headquartered in Oklahoma, but I believe has operations also in North Dakota. So for resource planning and availability, we're looking at the minimum reliability attributes needed from the resource mix. Most of the utilities and the operations within the SPP footprint operate or are obligated to operate under the North American Electric Reliability Corporation standards, which is under the oversight of FERC. Those reliability, that's one of the primary functions of the Operating Reliability Working Group is to evaluate those processes. Are we following the NERC requirements? Are we falling short? How are we falling short? Is it frequent? Is it consistent? Are there changes that need to be made to press through the process? So we'll be looking at those sorts of things. What are the current needs? What are the future needs? What's the framework for us to review these things periodically? How do we stay on top of this? What kind of scenarios for extreme weather conditions do we need to develop to incorporate into the models that we're looking at? The resource planning and availability too has to do with accreditation in the season. This is another place where the seasonal accreditation will probably come into play. So we're having that debate. How many seasons? Do you just do winter? Do you do summer? Do you do 4 seasons? How do you coordinate outage scheduling if you have multiple seasons that you're looking at? So they're also looking at performance accreditation for conventional resources. And we've looked at, and SPP has adopted electric load carrying capability kind of accreditation policies for renewable resources. So the RSC members participate, as you've probably gathered, in a number of these. A couple of them that I haven't really mentioned are the Regional Allocation Review Task Force, When FERC approved SPP's highway byway cost allocation methodology back in 2010, one of the conditions of that order was to periodically review, take a look back. How is it working? Are there inequities? What's the cost and the benefit? And you look at that zone by zone to get a sense of where are there some inequities in the system? Are there things that we need to address? And if you fall below a certain standard, what can we do? What do we need to do to bring you up to that minimum standard? So we've had some projects that we've approved as the RSC to bring a couple of entities that were below that baseline standard to bring them up and into that process. So that's an ongoing process. It used to be a study that was done once every 3 years. We changed that to go every 6 years, and so it's currently underway. That evaluation process is currently underway, and we're looking at making some changes to how that, trying to incorporate not only some of the historical market, but also some of the looking forward aspects of that cost allocation. Order 2222 was a FERC order that basically required the RTOs to allow the aggregation of distributed energy resources. And so that required some tariff changes to bring the tariff into compliance with that order. Those requirements are to be completed by July of this year. The Tort Task Force has completed its work. I believe SPP is in the process of currently finalizing the language for that compliance order. So I have noted here where Commissioner French is active. He is on the Regional Allocation Review Task Force. He was on SCRIPT, continues to be on SCRIPT to the extent it continues in existence, and the Consolidated Planning Process Task Force, as well as well, and I'm the representative on the Improved Resource Availability Task Force. So I believe those are all the groups that the RSC typically participates in. So you can see we're pretty active among the groups there. Oh, and I got ahead of myself again, so I apologize, but there's the Regional Allocation Review Task Force. I don't know that I need to explain any more of that. Order 2222 Task Force I've covered as well. SCRIPT, that was composed of 11 members from the Strategic Planning Committee or Members Committee, and there were 2 RSC members on there. And that's the effort to try to streamline the transmission planning processes. There are a lot of study processes that exist within SPP, whether it's for generation interconnection, for transmission planning, and some of the studies overlap. And so it's an effort to find a way to streamline those study processes to get the most bang for your buck out of those study process, to shorten the process. And part of the impetus, I think, for a lot of this is just the fact that we had a generation interconnection queue that was practically 4 years behind. So the Consolidated Planning Task Force now is going to take a deep dive into just what it is that needs to be streamlined. And so they're taking a look at those processes. That will also include taking a look at cost sharing mechanisms. And so they will continue that process going forward. The IRATF membership I've already discussed on slide 24. And then what we do at the KCC, we've created an internal SPP work group, and that technically is what my title is SPP Work Group Consultant. But we have similar to how the COG operates, we have our own internal staff, our own expertise economists, financial analysts, engineers, attorneys, and we kind of divvy up the work group load, and some of us follow certain of the working groups at SPP, and then report back to our SPP work group. I'm responsible for coordinating, developing agendas for those meetings, coordinating who's doing what, keeping everybody informed of what's happening in those various groups, and then just keeping an eye on some of those bigger issues. And sometimes we do discuss items that are happening at FERC that might be of interest to the state, whether it's as an RSC or the state of Kansas itself, so that we can get better informed. And just as an aside, many of you probably know that Commissioner French is on the FERC-NARUC joint task force that's studying a lot of these issues and looking at how do you modernize the grid and how do you share the costs of that. And so we pay attention to FERC activities as well. Current issues that are before SPP, we have the Western expansion. As many of you may know, they're proposing to, there are several entities on the West that are interested in joining SPP. They have signed letters of intent. Beginning in April, they will need to make a commitment, a financial commitment to whether they're going to join or not. So that will be, we will know more on the horizon. It'll probably take about a year to get them integrated once they do join. One of the issues that exists there that they're still trying to hammer out, and they may have it mostly hammered out now, but we do have those direct current ties along the Kansas-Colorado line, kind of that western seam of SPP, and some of them are going to need upgrading. Some of them have limited capacity. Some of them are fully subscribed. Some of them are not fully subscribed. Some of them have joint ownership. So there's a lot of complications with that they're trying to work out how that's going to be allocated. I think as they exist today, they'll be treated as legacy facilities, and so they'll come in as legacy facilities. They're trying to work out market design and some of those issues as the flow across those ties. So those are ongoing efforts. And you'll see on slide 27 the list of entities that have expressed an interest in joining SPP. HITC2 is the cost allocation waiver. I know you've heard about this a couple weeks ago. This has been an ongoing issue at SPP probably from 2017 or 2018. The RSC did make a first attempt at the cost allocation waiver last year. That filing was made in April. It was rejected by FERC, and that it took about 2 months for that process at FERC. So the rejection was based on the FERC really wanted more criteria to be developed to put some limits on the SPP board's discretion for approving waivers. And the desire of the board was that this be a very narrow waiver process. And so we've come back, we've looked at it, we've analyzed it, and we've developed 3 criteria for moving forward. The SPP anticipates making a filing at FERC on this new effort, this new waiver process by the end of this month. Let's see. Generation interconnection, we've talked about a little bit already. SPP has been undertaking a number of efforts to reduce that generation interconnection queue. And they started in 29 with a 3-stage generation study process to sort of split the impact study into a couple of phases to help speed things along. That has had some success, but they're continuing to make process improvements along the way to some of the models. They study interconnection requests in clusters or groups, and so they're looking at at how to make that process a little bit more efficient, and also to consolidate those. The CPPTF, the Consolidated Planning Process Task Force, will be continuing to look at that issue as well. The plan now is to have that interconnection queue eradicated by 2024, probably more towards the end of 2024. But that's the plan at the moment. The joint MISO SPP targeted interconnection queue is something that is new. It was new to SPP and MISO. It was created in 2020. It was an effort to take a look at the internet connection queue issues. MISO is also suffering from backlog in that arena, and this is an effort to jointly study the seam, to take a look at the constraints that exist along the seam, to identify those constraints, to develop a project portfolio to address those constraints. And they've recently come out with a study of their recommendation of those projects that'll have to go through processes at both RTOs and have to go before FERC. But they are also in the process and have made some modifications to their joint operating agreement, SPP and MISO have, to address they've been able to find some common ground on some of these study processes. So the next step for that JTIQ process will be looking at cost sharing. Transmission delivery charges, I have put on here. This is not something that really is necessarily an SPP related. I mean, it's related to SPP, but it's not something that SPP concerns itself with. I know it's been something of interest, and I thought I would include a slide just to address that interest, to give you some insight into what those delivery charges are, how KCC addresses them. And I included as an attachment a report and recommendation that the staff had put together last year, in 2021, to address Evergy Metro and the analysis that's there. But I just wanted to include that to really give you an idea of some of the costs that get passed through. But as I said earlier, transmission activities are regulated by FERC, and most of the utilities have a transmission formula rate that they have on file at FERC. And the costs that they're paying for transmission get recovered through those rates in that transmission formula rate. And the transmission delivery charge just sets up that those get passed through. Our staff at KCC generally is looking to verify the calculations and that those are rightly assigned to retail customers. But they essentially are deemed prudent when FERC issues that order. So that's the process. And fortunately, I think I have some staff behind me that could really answer any questions you might have about the particulars, because that's something that I don't typically do. But I wanted to let you know that was there. And I know there had been, well, I'll just stop there. I've gone, I think, about 40 minutes, and I better save time for questions. So I would just say that if you desire further information, SPP has an SPP 101. The Regional State Committee also has a history document that's available. And if you'd like to ever have those access to those, I'd be happy to furnish them.
Love the 101 stuff around here this year. So questions, Representative Keither.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you for coming and giving this talk this morning. When was the KCC staffing for the SPP activities created? When did you start doing that?
I believe Commissioner Wright had, and I don't know if Commissioner Moffitt had something in place before that. There was something that was loosely organized as an SPP work group when Commissioner Wright was involved. We had a staff person that was advising him who retired not long after Commissioner Wright left the commission. And we took that opportunity to sort of diversify the staff contributions to the work group to build on the other expertise that we had within the utilities division staff. So as it exists in its current form, probably 2015, maybe, I'm not sure.
I'm just sort of wondering in alongside KETA, if this was something that became more important as the role of KETA was taken away for the KCC to be more in touch with what was going on at the SPP.
I don't know if it was necessarily related to KETA, although I can't say that it wasn't related to that. I think a lot of it is just that there were so many changes beginning to be seen at SPP and needs that needed to be addressed to bring in renewable resources and to work with our RTO neighbors, that we just felt like we really needed to expand our level of experience. And plus, to the extent that we're reviewing transmission formula rates and filings, and there have been times when we've made filings ourselves at FERC to address what we consider to be maybe a return on equity that was higher than what was warranted. I mean, we've been very active in that regard and looking at some of those things. So there were a lot of elements, I think, that went into the decision to diversify our group a little.
I'm appreciative that you've done that. I think that makes a whole lot of sense. Mm-hmm. The other thing that I'm really interested in is this joint MISO SPP themes project. And obviously the study report just came out, but is there any other kind of timing that you can tell us about and what size the projects are going to be?
Let me pull out my report. I printed it off. There are 7 projects, and I'd be happy to furnish you with this report as well. There are 7 projects. Of those that are, most of them, well, let's see, for MISO, there's one solely SPP is Auburn to Hoyt, a 345 kV. That's included there. There is a Sibley 345 bus reconfiguration project, that's SPP. There is it's referred to as RON. It's a 345 kV, but it's slated as MISO SPP, and I'd have to look at my map to see. It looks like it runs. It looks like it's really more between up along the Nebraska, where Nebraska borders Iowa, just in that kind of in this Council Bluffs area and south. That's a 345. And so I do have the report, and I'd be happy to make it available because there is a nice little chart.
I like charts.
I'll get it to you.
Great, thank you.
Sure.
Representative Schreiber.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you, Sherry, for the information. My question goes back to slide 9, which you use a term in there, a couple of terms, license plate and postage stamp rates. Could you kind of explain the differences there?
Well, I would say, I know that I think both ITC and Sunflower explained to you our highway byway concept for cost allocation. So if it's a 300 kV and above under the highway byway, that spreads the cost to everybody based on load ratio share. That's like a postage stamp. On the other end of things, you have the zonal, where you have one third regional, 2/3 local. That's more like a license plate. So it's how you spread the costs. Do you spread them to all equally, or do you have a different category and you get a different rate? But that's what that is.
One other question. You talked a little bit about the interconnects to the Western interconnect. Mm-hmm. Are there any cost estimates on what new ties would cost? I know they're fairly expensive, but Does SPP?
I'm sure they have those numbers. I don't know off the top of my head what those estimates are. I could certainly get that information to you, though. But I think they're in the millions of dollars.
Sure, yeah. Several. Okay, thank you. Thank you.
Sure.
Other questions for this conferee? Representative Carmichael.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Following up on my colleagues' questions. First, with respect to the three-tier system for the allocation of the cost of transmission, I guess I was under the mistaken impression that those three tiers were something that was put in place by SPP, but I think I heard you say it comes from FERC. Can you straighten me out? Who is it that says 100% of over 3 AV is regionalized?
It was. These are all tariff revisions. They're tariff. The tariff. These were policies that were developed within SPP, and they go through the RSC. They go through the board of directors. Once they have been determined to be adopted by SPP, then SPP staff makes a filing at FERC because we have to change the tariff to incorporate those changes. So highway byway was one of those methodologies that had to get FERC approval because it's part of the tariff.
To follow up on that with the chair's permission, in other regions, do they allocate those charges differently than we do in the SPP?
Yes.
Okay. A second question, follow up on Representative Schreiber's excellent question about the DC ties. In addition to how much they cost, but can you tell us what the capacity is presently to move power through, I think, the 7 ties, if I recall correctly, that are up and running? Or if not, can we find out? Because one of my concerns about integrating with the Western grid is that we don't have the capacity to do it.
Well, I'm thinking it's around 600 to 700 megawatts, but I probably need to make that subject to check because there are 7 ties, but I don't know that all 7 are implicated in the expansion to the west. There may be just 4, but I can get you the totals for each one. I know I have DC tie information in a file folder on my computer.
I'd appreciate that because I'm trying to get an idea how much capacity do we presently have to accomplish this, and if I combine that with Representative Schreiber's question, how much is it going to cost to expand it? Thanks.
Further questions? Representative Delperdang.
Just real quick, thank you. And to expand on that, was the 700 some megawatts, was that per tie or total?
Total.
Okay, thank you.
Any other questions? Seeing none, thank you for that very thorough presentation this morning.
Thank you. Appreciate
your time this morning, Ms. Feist-Albrecht. All right, committee, while Representative Anderson passes those donuts around, we're going to... my phone rang a couple meetings ago, so I owed it. So we're going to turn our attention first to Senate Bill 417. If you want to grab your folders. My apologies to those in the gallery who thought you were coming to talk about mental health this morning and got a straight dose of good old-fashioned utilities 101, so we'll get there. All right. Brief refresher, Senate Bill 417 is the bill concerning the fly ash regulation and allowing for KDHE to continue that regulation in lieu of federal oversight. Is there anyone who has a proposed amendment to Senate Bill 417? I see no proposed amendments. Is there any motion concerning the fate of Senate Bill 417? Representative Keither.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I propose that we pass out Senate Bill number 417 favorably.
Second from Representative Neighbor. Any discussion on the motion? Seeing no discussion, you wish to close?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I move my motion. Thank you.
You've heard the motion. All in favor say aye. Aye. Opposed, nay. The ayes appear to have it. The ayes do have it. Senate Bill 417 will be reported favorably for passage. Representative Carmichael? Okay. Representative Carmichael would like his affirmative vote recorded. We will make that happen. Next, we'd like to turn our attention to Senate Bill 19. So as we discussed previously, the intention would be to gut Senate Bill 19 and insert the contents of House Bill 2281 with any amendments that we might have. So I have, in conjunction with the chair of the House Health Committee, ask the revisers to prepare a balloon amendment that I would like to have distributed now. Is it changed from this, or is it still that? Get that funding language in. We're still working on So as the drafts are going out, I'll walk through the balloon, what's being done here. The chair of the House Health Committee asked that we make a couple of changes. One of those is to make the 988 committee or commission an advisory one. So that is done in this amendment. On page 3 of the balloon, you'll see that I've thought that there are hundreds of millions of dollars available in federal funds for the 988 implementation. And so we wanted to make clear that KDADS is to apply for and receive federal grants for this purpose and make use of as many federal dollars as possible for 988 implementation. On page 4 and 5 and on through the strike-throughs, this amendment would remove the 20-cent per line fee and the 4-cent charge on prepaid wireless. However, since it is unknown at this time whether or not that will be the sustainable funding method used in the future, I did leave the small balloon that you see on page 4 that providers should still prepare for potential implementation of a fee in the future if that is the legislature's decision to fund the program that way instead of some other way. So flip to page 8. Kind of some to the business end. So the IDD community that came to speak to us about their concerns, the language in the top part of the balloon on page 8 is an attempt to address those by making clear the intent that regardless of someone's developmental disability status, they should be provided service if they call 988. This puts it in the proper section of the bill. I think the proposed language we had from the conferee the other day had it in another part of the bill. This puts it in the KDADS portion, the funding portion, that funds may be used for crisis care for folks both in the IDD community and not in the IDD community. On down, we make an allocation of $10 million from SGF to fund the program for the first year. I've talked to the appropriations chair. Obviously, this is subject to further appropriation, but he thinks this is doable this year. It also will work like the funding in the Promise Act did, that if only $6 million is spent the first year, The other 4 will roll forward, and only $6 million will be allocated in future years. So we're not reallocating $10 million regardless of how much is used. That if we don't use it all, some of it rolls forward and can be used in the future years. The key performance indicators at the bottom of the page, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. These are just items that we want to have highlighted by KDADs in their report back to the legislature. Some of these were in the bill previously, and some have been added. I think it's important that we differentiate the cost of the service implementation from the cost of the mental health services that are then provided. And so we want to get reporting on that. We want to get reporting on how many grants have been applied for and how many grants have been successfully obtained for implementation. So that's kind of the accountability and metrics piece that you see on the bottom of that page. The page 9 makes clear that the council is advisory and will not function like the 911 board as a separate entity with oversight and funding decisions. It will simply act as an advisory board to the Secretary of KDADS. And I think with that, you pretty well have the gist of my proposed amendment. I would move my amendment and see if there's a second. Here, a second, 3 seconds. So we have second, third, and a fourth. Any discussion on the amendment? Representative Delperding and then Carmichael.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Just a little elaboration on page 4 where the balloon pulls out prepare for the potential collection and remittance of. Could you just expound on that a little bit as far as what's that? I understand what it's saying, but what's that mean in reality?
There are a number of ways that sustainable funding for the program could be found, some of which may still occur in this session. And I will be sending a letter to the LCC asking for interim days for a committee to examine sustainable funding for the program in the future. It may well be that they say we're going to do this through a fee. This just keeps the providers aware that that may be ultimately the method a future legislature would choose to fund the program. And so we didn't want to lose that readiness piece if that decision is made at some point in the future. Effectively, they know how to collect a fee. We've all looked at our phone bills. We know that. But it's as much a statement of policy as anything else.
And then does this affect only cell phone bills, or does it landlines also?
This would be, I think, all lines are what's defined in the bill. So I think the 20-cent fee would have been both cell phones and landlines.
So I was wondering, okay, because just a general comment. I looked at my landline bill recently. It's like $35 for the month, and almost more than 50% of that on top of it for fees. So it's like there comes a point you say enough is enough. So, okay, thank you.
I think we heard the term pancaking, so we can add that to our lexicon. Representative Carmichael.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. First, following up on Representative Delperding's question, as I understand it, under the balloon amendment, nothing for this shows up on the phone bill at this point.
That is correct.
I want to speak in strong support of this amendment, and my compliments to those who drafted it and worked on it. I was really concerned that we were going to fund this hotline with a tax on telephones, a regressive tax, a terribly regressive tax, one that would have been imposed, in fact, on some of the very people that this program is designed to help. The idea that we were going to use, in essence, a sales tax or an add-on fee to fund these mental health services, which don't have really anything to do with the telephone. I just found that abhorrent. And it looks to me like the chairman's found a way to keep that from happening. And I express my sincere appreciation for that work that's been accomplished here. I'd also like to leave with the comment that hopefully this program will work well, because I think we need to take a look someday at the 911 Council and the way that it is funded, because this looks to me like a vastly superior model about how to collect the money, how to maintain the money in the state treasury, how to turn these councils into an advisory board, and how to make the authority to run the program in the hands of government, in this case, KDADS, and perhaps the 911 Council someday might ought to be a part of KDIMS. So I think this might be a good start for some other purposes as well. And again, I appreciate the chair's work. Thank you.
Thank you. Other comments, questions? Representative Mason.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And as much as I hate to agree with my colleague from Wichita, I too would like to add my thanks for this. On the top of page 8 is the little provision that I would have brought as an amendment to include the IDD community. There seems to be a lot of misunderstood crossover between the IDD community and co-occurring mental illnesses. So those people often fall through the cracks. It's important for them to be included in this, and so I thank you.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chair. And I want to give my thanks to the chair of HHS for her understanding the concerns of the committee and working it towards a resolution, working with you and others. Thank you very much.
Other questions? Okay, seeing none, I'll go ahead and close on my amendment. I too want to echo the comments of Representative Bergquist. Representative Landwehr's work in the Health Committee. She's been a tireless advocate for mental health, and she has worked diligently on the 988 implementation, which could have been a fairly pedestrian implementation of the hotline without concern to the services that need to come in behind the hotline to really provide the help that people in mental health crisis need. And she was unwilling to let it just be good enough and continue to push to make it a great program. And I think the work of our committee will help further that as well. So a debt is owed of thanks to Chair Landwehr for her work and the work of her committee. And with that, I will close on my amendment. All those in favor say aye. Aye. Opposed, no. The ayes have it. The amendment passes. Are there any further amendments for Senate Bill 19? Okay, seeing none, I think we'll designate this as a House substitute for Senate Bill 19. Is there a motion concerning House substitute for Senate Bill 19? Representative Schreiber.
Make a motion that we pass out House substitute for Senate Bill 19 favorably.
I see a second from Neighbor first and Mason as well, if you want to record both of them. Any discussion on the motion? If not, do you wish to close? Close. You've heard the motion. All in favor say aye. Aye. All opposed, no. The ayes have it. House substitute for Senate Bill 19 will be reported out favorably for passage. Representative Carmichael. Yes. And Representative Carmichael would like his vote recorded. Committee, sometimes you'll see a chair go down to the well and ask for a meeting at the rail to approve minutes. I've never liked doing it that way. I will ask you if you have objection to having the minutes for today's meeting sent out to you electronically. And if I've not heard any objection by, say, Thursday at close of business, we will deem those approved. Is there any objection to handling the last set of minutes that way? Okay. All right. If there is, we'll call a meeting at the rail. So, yeah. Okay. I want to take a minute to give you all the rest of the schedule for this week. Thursday, the 17th, is our last committee meeting day, and we're not going to meet. So you've worked hard and listened to a lot of presentations this year, and I want to give you a day off, so enjoy St. Patrick's Day. I also want to thank our committee staff, Nick and Susan, James, and Adriana down there keeping the computer going, and all of our team that has worked diligently this year to help make the committee a success. We have been very fortunate to have them. Unfortunately, due to what I consider an erroneous position taken by the State Ethics Commission, we're unable to go around and shake you all down for $5 to give Susan a gift. But I will let her take the excess donuts, which I do believe are still de minimis, down to the office on one. So, yeah, right. Is there any comments from any member of the committee, anything for the good of the order today? Representative Keither.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I appreciate the way the committee has run this year. I think what we've done in terms of our endless amount of 101 has really been fabulous for this committee, and I've been really pleased with all the presentations. I have been at every meeting, believe it or not. As the ranking D, I'm still present, but I thought I'd make it here today and to see everybody and to say thank you for the hard work.
Thank you. Anything else? Anyone else? Okay. I want to thank Representative Schreiber and Keither, who have helped schedule a lot of these presentations. They've been quite good, and I hope that they've been useful for all of you. And if you continue on Utilities Committee and come back next year, I hope that it forms a foundation for you to build on as you go forward. These folders are yours to take now. Please do take them so that Susan doesn't have to take them back to her office. Keep what you want and recycle the rest. But do think about keeping the Utilities 101 presentation in particular. That stands out to me as a resource that would be very helpful. But all of these resources are now yours. And with that, if there's nothing else to come before us, House Utilities is adjourned for this session.